Hey everyone. I thought I would try something a little different here, something a little old school for anyone who's been watching for a while now. Take a walk with you guys and talk a bit about anxiety and how exactly it is that you can start to rewire your brain to not be anxious anymore. So let's go ahead and get into it. Real quick, for anyone who's new to the channel here, a quick hello to you. My name is Dave. I'm a coach and hypnotherapist working in this area of psychedelics, particularly integration work. My focus and my passion, really the bigger picture of what I'll be doing on this channel and with my work in general, is helping people to kind of connect these peak experiences they've had, these breakthrough moments, these spiritual moments, into their daily lives, to bring it more into the places where we might need it, where it's most healing, where it's most transformative. So that's really my passion, my joy. And more specifically right now, I've been talking a lot about anxiety. And this is something that I'll be focusing on for a little while on the channel because there's just such a massive need for tools and resources and healing in this world at this time. So here I am doing what I can to serve all of you. So let's go ahead and get into it. So I've been kind of going over the analytics on my channel and just kind of getting a sense of who you are, who my viewers are, because I don't get a lot of comments from everyone, probably because I have a channel about social anxiety, and maybe either what I'm saying isn't that hitting that home for a lot of you, or it's too all over the place, or possibly because you're shy. So I've been going over the analytics to try to get a sense of what videos hit, what content hits, and what I can make more of that's really going to serve you. And so it's very clear that what the most interesting topic on the channel that I've been talking about is, for most of you, is anxiety, specifically social anxiety, but also probably general anxiety. So I wanted to start to hone down and target my content more along these lines. So the conversation going forward is going to be a lot more focused around anxiety, around how to rewire your brain, how to transform, more practical for the most part. And we'll also be looking at kind of introducing this new topic of what I call resourcing work, which is a form of integration work, and kind of how understanding how we can use psychedelics to create lasting change. Because this whole conversation of, do psychedelics actually change you long term? How can you get the change and keep the change, is a bigger conversation, and I think a very important one, a very missing piece that I have a lot to say about, and actually have some really cool techniques to share with everyone. So that's the bigger picture. But for now, let's get into this conversation beginning right now, changing the conversation moving forward, talking about anxiety and what you can do about it so that you can start to transform your life. So let's get it. So the way I'd like to serve you today on this conversation is I want to create for you a different view, a different perspective on anxiety and on mental health struggles and challenges in general. So everything I'm about to share here is grounded in our current understandings of neuroscience. So this is not just my pet theory. This isn't just I took LSD and had an epiphany. This is what I've been training on, what I've been studying around. This is stuff I learn about from therapists, stuff I learn about from doctors, stuff I learn about from hypnotherapists, stuff I learn about from all kinds of different perspectives about what's going on neurologically when we're dealing with something like anxiety. So I want to start to kind of create a clearer understanding for you and offer you a different paradigm, a different lens, if you will, to look at these experiences you're dealing with through, that hopefully is more empowering, that is hopefully something that gives you a clearer sense of how you can start to fix it, start to change it. So let's go ahead and unpack that a bit. So I want you to consider for a moment that what anxiety really is a brain habit. That what you're dealing with isn't a sign that you're broken, but it's actually a sign that your nervous system is working perfectly and properly, and it's just been wired up to present this particular experience to you over and over, and that it's the brain's way of creating stability and consistency for you that is kind of run amok, if you will, and is now a problem for you. So consider that what anxiety is at a deeper level. If we unpack it, it's a process. It's not a thing. So unfortunately, with the language we use, we have what's called a nominalization here. So in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, we make this distinction of, because we're always looking at how do words affect the nervous system, the neurology, how does language influence perception and state and emotion, right? And so we have what's called a nominalization with most mental health diagnoses, or even if you're self-diagnosing or just trying to describe an experience you're having, we use nouns to describe processes. And, in the most strict literal sense, if you think about it, a noun is something you can touch, something you can hold. It's something you can, physically manipulate. And your brain understands nouns in this way. So when you use the language of a noun, your brain kind of understands it as an object, right? But when you're using the word of a noun to describe what is actually a process, it gets confusing because the brain wants to categorize it as an object, but it's not an object you can touch or manipulate or see or, kind of physically, tactilely experience, right? And so you end up with kind of this sense of being stuck with something that is bigger, that is larger, that is, an object that is immovable because it's not really an object. And, conversely, when you unpack it and you realize that anxiety is a process, not a thing, then all of a sudden you start to understand that if it's a process, that there are moving kind of events inside of that process. And as you start to think about what those events are that constitute the full experience of anxiety, if you will, instead of feeling anxious, notice what happens. Just side note really quick. Notice what happens inside you when you say, I have anxiety, or I have been having the experience of feeling anxious. One's very processy, right? The other is very nounish, very objective, right? I have anxiety. I have been experiencing feelings of anxiety. I have been experiencing sensations and feelings. Totally different flavor, different feeling to it, right? Anyways, so as we start to recognize that these are processes, then all of a sudden we have choice. We have leverage points. We have ability to consider other ways that we could go, and ways that we can intervene. All of a sudden there are sub-processes inside this large process. So that's point number one. Point number two that I want to make is that really what we're dealing with is a loop. That with anxiety and really with most problems, and this even goes beyond mental health problems, but into just problems in life, generally, if they persist, if they continue to repeat over and over, they must by definition be a loop, right? So if you think about it, that means that there is kind of a trigger point or something that starts the cascade of the loop. There's a series of events that happens inside of that loop. And then there's something that kind of ends the loop and brings it back around to start all over again, right? So it's interesting to think about when we're dealing with anxiety, what is it that triggers the loop? What are the events of the loop? And what's kind of the tail of the loop that kind of feeds back into triggering more of the same thing again? So those are places to look to start to get more clarity and more ability to start to create change. Okay, so there's a couple other things I want you to know about what anxiety really is, so that when you're saying I have anxiety, what you're really describing is I have a loop of persistent set of whatever thought processes, body sensations, whatever the signifiers are for you of the state of anxiety. I have a loop that's being triggered unconsciously that is a process that happens over and over, and I don't know what's causing it, what's stopping it, what's, or how to intervene with it, which would be a much more clear way of describing what it is that you're going through, right? So a couple other things here. First of all, it's important to recognize that anxiety is not a rational process, right? It's not a top-down, conscious mind creating an impact in the body process. Generally speaking, for most people, Anxiety is a bottom-up process, right? It's something where you have a sensation, right? You have a body feeling, you have a triggered memory that comes up and ripples up through your body into your conscious mind. And then by the time you realize that you're feeling stressed, worried, anxious, upset, triggered, whatever it might be, you're already caught up in the loop, right? So one of the ways that we start to resolve anxiety is by learning how to regulate our nervous system from the bottom up as well. So not only is the problem bottom up, but very often you'll find that the solution is bottom up as well. So you want to learn ways to regulate the nervous system so that you move out of fight or flight into parasympathetic, rest, relax, restore. And as you do that, and you learn these skills of how to regulate, the nervous system just starts to recognize the pattern, and instead of running into getting all ramped up, it knows how to unwind. But even if it doesn't, you have the tools now to know how to unwind it so that you're not stuck with that loop if you don't want to be. So neurologically, what's happening when we have anxiety is that essentially the nervous system recognizes some stressor or threat or frightening situation, whatever, some context that doesn't feel right. It pulls on some old process that it knows to do, that your brain is essentially associated with surviving that situation in the past. So, if feeling anxious and stressed out, happen to coincide with you not dying from a embarrassing moment, let's say, in the past, then your brain will kind of assume that those states were helpful in helping you to not die. And it will represent those states anytime you're in a similar situation or context. So it's just kind of automatic, implicit learning on the part of the nervous system, which is how we survive. It's part of our evolutionary mechanism of survival. It's a good thing. It means everything's working right, but also it's not very intelligent or discerning, if you will. So it just kind of generally looks at like the shape of the situation you're in, pulls on a particular body response, and it may not be how you want to feel. And so really what this is, we have kind of a neural path, the old neurons that fire together, wire together thing. We have a neural path that's been set up that, again, becomes like a loop. The way I think of these loops, it's almost like a looper pedal with a musician where, you see these musicians who, pick up an instrument, they have a looper pedal on, they play something, and then that'll just loop over and over and over. And they can put the instrument down, pick up another instrument, loop something else, and kind of be a one-person band, right? Well, that looper doesn't know the difference between good notes and bad notes. It just loops the notes over and over and over infinitely until the musician turns the looper off. So it's kind of the same thing here with us. Like, our brains don't know whether good states or bad states. It's going to keep looping it if it seems like that's helpful. Okay, so you may be wondering, well, how the fuck do we fix it, right? How do I get out of the loop? Because that's what I want. I just don't want to feel this way anymore. Well, here's the basic idea. So if this neural path has kind of been worn in, and generally speaking, the more we think and fire a neural path, the more deeply it gets carved and entrenched in the brain, so to speak. What we can do, the good news is that these are generally unconscious automatic processes, right? So as we make them conscious again and we start to access them, whether it's through memory or through somehow pulling up this experience, we can then go ahead and interrupt that loop, interrupt that neural path, and redirect it, rewire your brain to have a different response, a different state, a different set of thoughts, a different perspective in this old situation that used to be upsetting. Hey, doggos. And so, speaking of which, that's actually perfect. I used to be dog phobic, and these dogs would have scared the shit out of me a long time ago. Now I adore dogs. So that's a perfect example of, kind of point in the case here. So we can interrupt the neural path, right? And we can redirect it in a new way. And this is what's known as therapeutic memory reconsolidation. So the basic idea is when you bring a memory or a trigger or whatever to the surface of your awareness, you have about a 5-hour window where you can actually interrupt it, where you can actually rewire it or unwire it. And then from there, you can rewire it in a new direction and let that settle back into the nervous system, and it will stay imprinted. And you might have to do it a few times to really get it to stick, but it works. And this is how we break a brain habit. So like I said, if anxiety is ultimately, or depression, or whatever, is ultimately a brain habit, this is how we start to break it. We go in, we access the triggers, we access the pieces, and we just interrupt them, and we just redirect, we just rewire. So this is a point I want to make that's, I think, incredibly practical. A lot of times what you find when it comes to mental health struggles is that in the world of psychology, in that language, in that kind of model, in that perspective, they tend to talk about these things as if it's all rooted in your past, as if what you're dealing with is always your past, as if what you're dealing with, you have to go in and kind of make the unconscious conscious in order to fix. Now, I would argue that really where the rubber meets the road isn't in your past, it's in your present moment. That what you're actually dealing with isn't something that necessarily is the past, although the brain may have learned it in the past. But what you're dealing with is a set of processes, right? A set of sensations, a set of thought loops, a particular area of focus. For example, are you focusing on the problem or are you focusing on what you want, right? There are all kinds of different kind of subtle nuances to the structure of your experience in the present moment that you're actually dealing with. And that's actually what anxiety is. It's a habitual recreation over and over of these sets of thought structures and body sensation structures that create the experience of as anxiety. So the most practical thing we can do, I'm getting excited like I always do when I talk about shit I really care about. The most practical thing we can do here is start with what you're experiencing now. So instead of having to dig up the past, instead of having to go deep into some whole psychological model, we can just simply look at what are the sensations in the body, what are the thought loops, what are they made of, and how do you know that you're experiencing anxiety? And then we can simply interrupt those and rewrite them, repattern them. And in my experience, when we do that, the stuff from the past tends to get processed along the way because it's all connected, right? So how could it not? But if you think about it, what's keeping it alive isn't the past. It's that it's alive somehow in the present now. So this is a very different approach from what you'll find in most kind of therapeutic models, or self-healing models or personal transformation models. It's much more about what's the neural path in the present moment. It's much more about what are the sensations in the body? What's the sensation? What are the thought loops? What's the self-talk? What's the picture in my head? What's the construction of this experience I'm having over and over? And then retraining from the bottom up, from the sensations first, interrupting the old pattern, bringing in the new state, rewiring it, redirecting it. And sure enough, over time, because the brain learns through single experiences and then generalizes them out, over time, you do this a few times with yourself and your brain starts to learn the pattern. Oh, okay, so when I'm stressed out and I start to trigger, these old kind of loops, do this instead now. And the brain will just start to learn the difference, generalize it out, which is exactly how we got the problem in the first place, right? So how did we get anxiety in the first place? We had a stressful moment, we had a stressful experience, we had a moment, where our body presented us maybe with some adrenaline and cortisol, or, we froze or whatever happened. And then the brain assumed that was good and then generalized that out to more areas of life, right? That's how we end up with these issues in the first place. So instead of just being a single instance of stress or overwhelm, it becomes the default mode. It becomes the way that we do more of life through. So that same process of generalizing solution and the way that the problem was originally generalized is how we start to fix it. So I hope this is starting to be more clear for you. I hope you're starting to understand what exactly anxiety actually is, that it's actually a brain habit, that's actually a loop that you can interrupt, that you can just take the needle off the record, redirect in a new way. So I hope this is making sense. Okay, so quick recap here to summarize, and then I'll kind of end with a note on how we can use psychedelics inside of this whole process. So essentially, what is anxiety? Anxiety is a bottom-up, that is sensations first, communication from the nervous system that is a loop. It doesn't have a beginning point, doesn't have an end point, it loops around. That was automatically learned by the nervous system as a survival kind of process, right? It's a process, not a thing. It is composed of particular neural circuits that have wired together by firing together a lot. And so what we can do is simply use the sensations, the thought loops, whatever's coming up in the moment. We don't even have to know what caused it originally, to start to interrupt that kind of process, kind of redirect it, rewire it, and then kind of help your brain to generalize that out over time. So this is actually a very effective way to undo and unwire anxiety, start to feel better. This is how I fixed myself, and I know it works. I've seen it happen with so many clients that can actually go very fast, much faster than traditional kind of therapy would be. And this is something you can do on your own. This is something you can do by yourself, or you can do with a coach like me, which I'd recommend you do, because then you get the benefit of someone watching and paying attention to you and noticing things about your experience that you may not even be tracking yourself. Okay, so to answer the question, kind of the $1 million question here, how do psychedelics kind of factor into all this? Well, there are a couple different ways that I've seen so far, that I've experienced, that work well. There's probably more ways, but this is how we can use psychedelics and this process, which is essentially therapeutic memory reconsolidation, to start to rewire the brain and kind of undo anxiety. So the first way would be that you could use a low to moderate dose. So this would either be microdosing all the way through, I would say, a low to kind of standard 100 microgram LSD, 1.5 gram psilocybin type dose of psychedelics. Enough where you're more neuroplastic, you're more kind of lit up, you're more flexible, but not necessarily so much that you're out of body and you're zonked and everything's incoherent and wild and just rainbows with your eyes open. That's not going to work. But if you're, just enough where you're kind of in the zone and a little more neuroplastic, then we can go ahead and start to do this process of interrupting the neural path and redirecting it. And what you'll find is that it takes and it burns deeper. See, the thing is with the unconscious mind, there are two ways that we wire up unconscious experience. One is through repetition, the other is through intensity of experience. So the more intense is particularly intense emotion. So the more intense an emotion is, or the more kind of repetitive we are on something, the more we are to wire it up in our nervous system. So with the psychedelic, making an experience of undoing and unwiring and rewiring more vivid, more intense, it tends to wire up more quickly. So that would be the first way. The second way is that we can take, let's say you took a significant dose of a psychedelic and you had a really positive experience. You had a moment of returning to childlike joy and wonder about the world, of absolute peace in your heart, of playfulness, of lightheartedness, of fearlessness, of total comfort and peace in your being, something like this, right? Some sort of profound shift in your state that was powerful and positive. Then what we can do after the fact is we can have an integration session where we take one of these experiences and we kind of relight it up in your nervous system, and then we go ahead and we use that to kind of neutralize the loop, to kind of undo and unwind this trigger of the loop and kind of neutralize it out and reprogram in with this kind of state that you prefer to feel instead. So these are both ways that I know that we can use psychedelics to undo anxiety. Obviously, also you can use psychedelics to, when you're coming up and you're feeling anxiety, to confront what it is you're anxious about and do some exposure therapy as well. But I would say that that's more transitory, and for a lot of people that's not going to make a lasting change. But these other two that I've just done, I've or just said rather, I've done with people and had some really incredible results with. So anyways, I hope that gives you a bit of a kind of the lay of the land of my view and my perspective on anxiety, how I rewired it for myself, how I've started to feel a lot better, and how you can too. And consider how this applies not only to just anxiety, but maybe depression, maybe to any phobias, any habits, any kind of unwanted behaviors, or kind of self-perceptions that you might be carrying that you'd like to fix. Really, the world becomes your oyster when you understand this process and you learn how to apply it well. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of techniques I can show you and throw at you guys, and I will. But I wanted to kind of just lay out the basics of how this all works so that you have kind of a lay of the land here, kind of a roadmap of how you might be able to start to transform your anxiety right away. So think about what are the body sensations, what are the thought loops, what are the emotion loops, what are the kind of stories and narratives you tell yourself, and then think about ways you could interrupt that. I mean, a very simple one obviously is, let's say you are stuck at home, you're isolated, you're freaked out, you're nervous, you're anxious, you're feeling depressed and despondent, hopeless about whatever. You could literally just simply get into a different environment. Go in your backyard, go take a walk, go take a hike like I am on this talk here, and just interrupt the pattern of your normal kind of thing when you get locked in that mode. And just doing that will start to pull you outside of that set of associations that you've wired up in your brain and empower you to start to make a bit of a shift and create some distance. So what are those things for you? What are the things that you do? What are the things that you could do to interrupt whatever's happening? And is this hitting home for you? Is this inspiring you? Is this touching you? Is this moving you? Is this something that you find you could use? So let me know in the comments below. It would mean a lot to me. If you've watched this whole video, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm looking for people who have attention spans, who are willing to do the work, who are down for the conversation and aren't just here for a quick, 2-minute fix. So if you're that person, then you might be a good fit for me as a client. I'm just happy to be able to serve you and share and give to you. So much love, be well. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.